So I know you're all waiting for my usual League content, and I honestly hope to get back to it once we're past all the craziness of launching a book. Since many of you would enjoy the story I've written, here's a free chapter. Keep listening at the end for information on how to get a full copy. Alic Press presents The Nightmare Throne by Lynn Clark. Read to you by Lynn Clark. For Erica. Part 1 of Gods and Shadows.
Black curtains of smoke sting my eyes and wet the tongue with the hot resinous sweetness of scorched caramelized sugar. Smoldering strawberry fields, restless writhing vines, tethered deep within the earth to simmer red and dark. I want to forget the world. Let me sleep in this land forever. Bury my face amidst these ashes. Unhear their anguished prayers.
Confessions of Irisea. Year unknown. Chapter 1. Against the Unseen. The skies were thick with blood. Warm and crimson, it showered through the canopy of dead branches, clinging and soaking into the blackened wood. It ran in rivulets down their trunks, merging into rancid streams, to later dry upon the mountainside in a coagulated crust. It took a special kind of person to see the abyssal rain, and Cassia, unfortunately, wasn't one of them. To her, it was as though the blood wasn't there. She had to picture it in her mind, the viscous globs pelting her leather hood, and the warm humidity against her face. It was damn unfair. The problem wasn't that Cassia wanted to see blood. She'd never been fascinated by the bleak and morbid. No, the real issue was that she'd wasted 7 years of her life chasing a dream. She'd gone against her mother's will and given up a reputable apprenticeship in bonesmithing. She'd put everything into her training, all with the expectation that her eyes would be opened to not only see the rain, but the abyssal current itself. In the end, her vision remained unchanged. Instead of setting things right, she'd ended up like her father. 2 weeks ago, her rites of ascendancy failed, and there were no second chances. From beneath her leather hood, as she rode alongside the rocking armored carriage, Cassia saw nothing to distinguish this afternoon from any other. There was nothing unusual in the pale, buttermilk sky, or the crunch of autumn grass beneath the mounted mercenaries. The air itself wasn't scented with copper, but sweet, dry cedar. Were it not for Tenlin's warning, reminding her to keep her dark red hair safely tucked within her hood, it might have been easy to believe there was no rain at all. Her mare's step faltered, giving a snort and shaking its mane with irritation.
"It's miserable, I know,"
said Cassia, stroking the horse's neck. Its slick black hair felt strangely dry. She could feel how the rain made it clump together, though she couldn't feel the stickiness itself. Still, It had been her choice not to ride inside the carriage. Instead of relaxing with her sister and the other two women, she had sought a different kind of peace. Outside, at least, she could pretend to be useful. More than that, she wanted to observe the mercenaries. Like her, these men couldn't see the blood either, and yet here they were, risking life and limb. Days away from the nearest populated village. Perhaps she, too, could find new purpose as a sentry. Urging her mare forward, she came up beside Tenlin, their group's ascendant, who was stooped forward, driving the carriage from beneath a black canvas overhang. Shoulder-length iron hair hung beneath the brim of his rawhide hat. Only his stern face was visible, with his body hidden beneath the folds of his cloak or wrapped in cloth bandages. She bit her lip.
I thought you checked the ropes.
Tenlin worked his mouth in distaste.
Wearing thin already? This damn corrosive weather.
They're not going to last.
Cassia insisted.
Perhaps if we move the heavier cookware inside?
Can't stop,
he said, with a deranged smile.
We're being followed. Don't turn your head.
Without the warning, Cassia might have done just that. And it took effort to keep her eyes forward on the 6 riders in front. A number far fewer than was typical these days. She felt a chill at the thought of something back there, watching through the trees. But looking back wouldn't have done her much good anyway. Whatever followed them would be as invisible as the rain. All the same, she found herself straining to hear anything above the fall of hooves and the bump and jolt of the carriage. The faint scrape of claws against the hard-packed earth. A rustling through the grass. The held breath of anticipation. But the forest was as empty and dead as it had been since leaving Wern's Hold 2 days ago. Her hand almost went to her spear at her shoulder, but she stopped herself. These weren't mindless creatures, and she had to be careful of such absent-minded gestures. At moments like these, she had to trust in her training. She'd practiced drawing her weapon on time in the event of an ambush. If needed, she also had knives at her waist and a loaded crossbow clasped to the saddlebag behind her.
Now, I need you to stay calm,
he continued.
Don't start anything out of the ordinary, you hear?
She nodded and drew her mare closer to the wagon. She lowered her voice just enough to be heard above the horses.
Did you get a good look at it?
Tenlin merely grunted.
Not really.
Cassia hid her frustration. Here she was, trying to understand a threat only he could see, and he didn't seem to care. Gingerly, she pressed further.
I mean, what if you only thought?
Thought what?
He asked with a scowl.
You think I would have said anything if I wasn't sure?
I meant no disrespect.
I know you didn't,
he said, softening his tone.
But look, this conduct might have worked with your professors, but out here on the road, it's not your job to question your ascendant officer.
Yes, sir,
she said, feeling foolish. After years of speaking casually with ascendants, it was a habit she found difficult to break. Tenlin had reminded her more than once on this trip to act deferential. But this time, he seemed less patient than usual. And she realized she'd never seen him quite so on edge. The ivory indirect sunlight deepened as the trees down the path grew closer together. The widest trunks were over 6 feet across, with crisscrossed branches that twisted like thorn bushes. It was beautiful in a way, not at all like the world Tenlin saw. And it wasn't just the blood or the monsters. Within the abyssal current, it was always dark, as though the sun itself had cooled into ash. There was no moon either, no stars. It was a wonder Ascendant could see anything at all. Cassia couldn't deny she'd been terrified by the prospect of entering that nightmare world. There had been times these past years when she'd climbed onto her dormitory's roof to watch the sunset. It had been her way of making peace with never seeing daylight again. Cassia still remembered how sad she'd felt, and how a part of her had hoped her ceremony would fail. But when that failure became a reality, Cassia became even more confused. The relief she'd expected never came. And while she was glad to see the sun, it had come to represent everything denied her. She adjusted her grip on the reins.
I'll ride to the front and inform the captain.
What did I tell you?
He asked.
Just sit tight. No sudden movements. The men will know soon enough.
His condescending tone sent heat through her face. A simple ride forward was unlikely to provoke an attack. If anything, the warning would make the men more alert, more primed to respond. Besides, shouldn't Captain Velt be making these decisions? While it was true Tenlin held seniority as their only ascendant, he'd chosen to defer his command to Velt. She didn't completely understand the arrangement, but sensed it was related to Tenlin's advanced age. Her lips parted, preparing to argue, but she stopped herself. There was something in Tenlin's poise, an unsteadiness in the way his bandaged hands gripped the reins. It was nothing so evident as sweaty skin or shaky palms. Outwardly, he appeared tired, bored even. But it was likely a cover, an effort to conceal how tightly he was stretched. Rather than take risks, he was delaying the attack as long as possible, long enough perhaps to reach the abandoned village she'd heard the others mention earlier. They were supposed to get there by nightfall.
You can tell me,
she said, keeping her tone aloof.
I won't panic. How many did you see?
He hesitated, meeting her gaze, before turning away. Cassia swallowed hard. Traveling with such a small escort was a gamble, but they hadn't much choice. Neither Cassia, her sister, nor Marion, her financial sponsor, could afford the more prestigious caravans. The Lady Marion had invested nearly all her wealth into Cassia's schooling, and yet she had insisted on paying this final traveling expense. They'd take this carriage back to Karheim together before splitting ways. Unfortunately, with insurance premiums on the rise, they couldn't afford more than a single elderly ascendant. This was not to say small companies were always bad. In many ways, small escorts had proven equally effective as larger ones, due to their speed and tendency to draw less attention. Cassia herself had traveled with similar groups in the past without incident. But the countryside was getting worse. There was little point in deceiving herself. They might have fended off a single attacker, 2 at most. Any more than that, and there'd be no battle. It'd be more of a chaotic retreat, a desperate struggle to keep ahead of the invisible onslaught. Cassia would end up dead like her father, all because her ceremony had failed.
Could you give me a guess?
She asked.
How many there are?
His grimace was sober.
Hard to say. More than I'd like. If you keep asking questions, I won't hear them coming.
And with that, she said no more. Not 15 minutes later, the riders stopped in front.
What's going on?
Asked Cassia. Tenlin shook his head, clearly nervous.
Go ahead,
He said.
check it out.
She nodded and urged her horse into a canter. Like most hunters or mercenaries, their group wore hoods and matching livery. Faded black cloth embroidered with a golden seagull. But unlike most companies, their assortment of armor was a mismatched array of shapes and shades. This was either an indication they saw combat frequently, with a continuous need to replace damaged gear, or their earnings weren't consistent enough to afford more than scraps. Out of sheer hope, Cassia preferred to believe the former. When she reached the front, the leading riders were in a heated debate.
We can't just stand here,
Said Roke, one of the men near Cassia's age.
I'm well aware,
Hissed Captain Velt, controlling his tone with difficulty. Their eyes looked ahead, as though searching for something. As Cassia brought her horse beside them, she found no obstructions. They weren't looking for a way around, as she might have expected had the land been washed away by floodwater. No, the dirt road was simply gone. Not destroyed, but more as though the road had never existed. The forest looked the same on all sides, with no discernible signs of which way to go.
I say we keep straight,
Said Roke.
We've been going the right direction, so sooner or later, we'll find where it picks up. You think?
The captain grimaced, but didn't disagree. He appeared to be weighing their options.
You're wrong,
Said another man.
We lost the road at the stream. I told you that wasn't no deer trail.
Give it a rest.
Said Roke.
You even stepped in deer shit. We all saw.
And?
None of this helped Cassia feel better.
Haven't you traveled through here before?
She asked, unwilling to believe Marion would have hired mercenaries with such poor experience.
Not recently,
Said one.
Been, what, 10 years?
When a few others admitted this was their first time through Greywood Pass, Cassia became increasingly appalled.
I have.
Said Velt.
But that's not the problem.
Everyone turned as the carriage rolled to a stop behind them. Tenlin met the captain's eyes and, in a raised voice, confirmed his suspicion.
The forest is moving.
The hell?
Asked Roke. Cassia, however, understood. It was a possibility that had worried her since learning of their route. The only reason she hadn't said anything was because she had expected these men's experiences to outweigh her own. The young man, too uncomfortable to look at the misshapen ascendant, directed his question at Cassia.
What does he mean, moving?
More like changing.
She clarified.
People don't talk about it much, but it's the risk you take the further you travel from civilization.
She shook her head.
None of this would have happened if we'd taken the main thoroughfare.
I agree,
said the captain. His reaction confused her because Velt wasn't the sort to admit his mistakes. There wasn't, however, any remorse in his tone. If anything, he sounded angry. Did she have it wrong then? Until that moment, she had assumed this was his idea, and had chosen Greywood Pass based on personal experience. But Velt wasn't really in charge now, was he? Marion was the one paying these men. Cassia frowned. She had known Marion's family most of her life, and couldn't think why the lady hadn't consulted her first.
We need a plan now,
said Tenlin. Cassia shot the ascendant a wide-eyed look, as though to ask if the creatures had finally caught up. Tenlin shook his head.
The rain is making us difficult to see. They're holding back, waiting for the storm to pass.
At this, the men exchanged nervous glances. Cassia swallowed, wondering if it could be so simple. So it wasn't luck they hadn't yet been attacked, but poor visibility? Everyone agreed something needed to be done, but no decisions were being made. That's when a woman's shout came from the carriage.
One moment.
The side panel had been opened. The shadows within made it difficult to see, but it seemed as though the lady was leafing through some notebooks.
Yes, here,
shouted Marion. She then leaned her upper body out the window. Her dark brown hair was a mess, a loose bun surrounded by several strays. She didn't seem bothered by the exposure to the blood, at least not as much as she cared to be understood. Cassia looked where the woman was pointing.
That peak above us,
said Marion.
We're in the right place. All we need to do is find the ravine between this peak and that one there. You see it, above those elms?
You're certain?
Asked Velt.
Without a doubt.
At once, Cassia felt both surprise and reassurance. This not only confirmed they'd been traveling the right way, but that Marion had planned for this. The lady was wise to use mountains as landmarks, as their size made them more resistant to changes in the forest.
You heard her. Move.
Captain Velt turned to the man nearest him.
Not you, Roke. I want you to drive the carriage. I'll feel better if Temlin has his hands free.
When the captain turned to the ascendant, the older man nodded in gratitude. Only Roke seemed to think this a bad idea, but he handed his horse into another rider's care. Tenlin slid to one side, a crossbow clutched between his hands, as the younger man took the reins and got them moving again. For the first time, Cassia felt some relief. Here was proof these men could behave like professionals, which made her willing to give Marion the benefit of the doubt. For all she knew, finding men more experienced with the region was impossible. The problem was that no one traveled here anymore. Cassia rode silently beside the large wheels, listening carefully for anything unusual. Once she felt reasonably certain an attack wasn't imminent, that the creatures were indeed waiting for the rain to subside, she leaned over and rapped her knuckles against the wooden panel. No one answered. She became insistent and shouted,
"Marion!"
before knocking a second time. The panel slid open, not by the lady, but by Cassia's younger sister, Illyriel. A girl of 15, she was nearing the age when Cassia had begun her training, except Illyriel had no interest in becoming an ascendant. She'd been content to let that be Cassia's thing, but was yet to decide what she'd rather do instead. Deep shadows concealed most of the girl's face, but not her sullen mood.
Marion doesn't want to talk right now.
Cassia groaned.
Damn it, Marion.
She leaned over to bang on the wood once more.
This is no time to hide.
From inside came an exasperated sigh.
What is it, girl?
There was movement as Illyriel switched places with the woman. For her advanced age, she wasn't unattractive, with deep green eyes and a few streaks of silver hair. Her facial lines were faint and more suggestive of a cheerful demeanor than otherwise. Her body was thin and donned with the refined ochre dress of someone accustomed to getting her way. Cassia grit her teeth.
Greywood Pass?
She asked, getting directly to the point.
You never mentioned this was your idea. What the hell are we doing here?
Watch your tone, young woman.
Or what?
It felt strange to yell at Marion, who, in many ways, had become like her second mother, one who appreciated Cassia more than her birth mother had. For the past 7 years, the woman hadn't only paid for Cassia's tuition, food, and clothing, she'd also covered Illyriel's needs. This alone went far beyond the terms of their contract. The woman had done more than enough to earn her loyalty and respect, and Cassia felt guilty for speaking so forcefully. But Cassia was furious, not for the woman's secrets or her reckless planning, but the fact she'd included her sister in this danger.
Look,
said Marion.
I didn't want to come here. There wouldn't have been a need had you only...
Had I only what?
Cassia knew exactly what Marion was going to say, and was outraged the woman would pin this on her, on the failed ceremony that neither of them anticipated. Marion said nothing. Taking a deep breath, Cassia realized this was a poor moment to take offense. Her failure, after all, hadn't only ruined her life, but Marion's as well. If it was desperation, however, that had driven the lady into Greywood Pass. The important thing now was to find out why. And Cassia would get no closer to those answers by behaving like a petulant child. She swallowed.
Just tell me what we're doing. What's out here, Marion?
The lady hesitated, then said,
We're almost there. Once we clear the ravine, you'll see Hebrel. It's an old village nestled between these mountains.
Cassia had never heard of a village by that name. Undoubtedly, it was the place the others mentioned earlier, an abandoned ruin. Until now, Cassia had assumed it was nothing more than a rest stop, a safe place to camp for the night before passing through.
This village, is it defensible?
Marion appeared surprised, then uncertain.
I'm not the right person to ask that question.
Cassia clenched her teeth in frustration. The lady frowned.
There was mention of a tower, I think.
Then she shook her head.
To be honest, my only information is what my husband wrote down. This all comes from his notes. They were never meant to be comprehensive.
So you look it up. Gods, Marion. Do you even realize how dangerous?
Marion raised a hand to stop her.
I tried, but there's nothing to research. When it comes to Hebrel, there are no records.
Cassia didn't know what to say.
No charters,
continued Marion.
No histories, not even tax reports.
While Cassia trusted the woman, she still found this difficult to believe.
Okay, but couldn't you have asked someone? I mean, Captain Velt claims to have traveled here before. There have to be others.
Marion nodded.
You're right. Memories don't disappear so easily as paperwork. But even so, when it comes to places like Hebrel, you can't just ask anyone. You never know who might be listening.
Suppose you're right, and someone is hiding something. Please don't tell me we came all this way to satisfy your curiosity.
That's not it at all,
said the woman with a smile.
We're out here because we know what's here. And why. It's all in the notebook.
Cassia hoped Marion would get to the point.
Hebrel might be small for a village, but it has one thing most these places don't. A monastery.
Cassia remained quiet, waiting for more. A monastery, after all, wasn't anything special. It provided sacred ground, of course, a location closer to the gods and the Aelic realms than any other. But monasteries were everywhere. In Karheim alone, there were half a dozen. Marion, however, appeared to be finished. For a second, Cassia couldn't shake her disappointment, as if all this build-up had been for nothing. But then it dawned on her. This wasn't just a monastery, but an abandoned monastery, which meant no monks, no priests, no supervising clergy. Marion was plotting something, the sort that shouldn't be discussed out loud. Cassia returned her attention to the terrain ahead. During their conversation, the path had brought them down a gradual slope, converging into the ravine proper. Sheer rock walls rose on both sides, where ancient glaciers had carved through the bedrock between peaks. Now, however, there was no water to be seen, leaving nothing more than a clear, dry path. Except, it wasn't really dry, was it? If the abyssal rain was as bad as Tenlin suggested, wouldn't the runoff from both mountains run straight through here? She imagined cascades of blood running down the cliffs in a continuous current against their horses' legs. The ascendant, however, didn't appear concerned, and Cassia was forced to conclude it wasn't deep. Even so, she continued to watch him, and was surprised when the man rose to his feet. He hastily took down the canvas overhang, removing the obstruction from his line of sight and the aim of his crossbow.
"Shut the window,"
instructed Cassia. Tenlin shouted,
"Let's pick up the pace."
The riders responded immediately. There was no moment of confusion or need for clarification. Cassia pushed her mare forward, maintaining her position beside the carriage.
"What is it?"
she asked, looking up at Tenlin.
"Rogue?"
he shouted.
"Get us out of here, now!"
His voice was all wrong. It was as though her ears had been stuffed with cotton. And it wasn't just his words that were muffled. Everything, from the creaking wheels to the fall of hooves to the sound of Cassia's breathing, was becoming increasingly difficult to make out.
Oh, gods,
she thought, as she drew her spear, without hearing so much as the scrape of leather.
They're here.
In less than a heartbeat, Tenlin turned, stepped onto his seat, and leaped high above the carriage roof. Cassia craned her neck, keeping sight of his dark cloak as it trailed behind him, snapping soundlessly through the air. The man flew up over 15 feet, impossible for anyone without an ascendant's strength. Before his trajectory lurched sideways. At first, Cassia thought he'd been hit, and he was thrown against the ravine wall. She was forced to turn away, her attention drawn to the rocks ahead. But just before she did, she saw him land on his feet. He'd landed sideways, high above the ground, to stand perpendicular against the stone. Only then did she realize the truth. Tenlin's abilities were not the same ones for which Cassia had been training. The older man was bound to a different god, a different realm, and a different set of rules. And while Cassia had taken time to study each of the 8 aspects and their branches of ascendancy, this was her first real chance to see this particular variety, known as equilibrium, in action. Cassia looked back and saw Tenlin running diagonally down the wall toward the invisible enemy. He was surprisingly agile for a man of his ungainly physique. He made it seem easy, as though the entire world had tilted sideways and he was running along the ground. From beneath the folds of his cloak came a flash of bone as he produced some weapon. At one instant, the blade trailed behind him, his right arm bent back. Then he was swinging in an upward arc. Tenlin sprung off the wall, flying parallel to the ground. To her surprise, his trajectory didn't slow, but sped up. There was a moment's resistance as his weapon contacted something. His orientation of gravity, one that affected only him, sent him through the enemy and falling toward the opposite wall. She wanted to keep watching, but was forced to turn away. Up ahead, Velt signaled some riders to fall back to help defend the rear of the carriage. At the same time, however, she saw the wagon bounce, with the ropes in the back stretching dangerously. All their packs, including their rolled-up canvas tent, bedding, and cooking supplies, drooped closer to the ground, threatening to break loose at any moment. Knowing this would pose a risk for the others, Cassia spun her spear. She waited for Tenlin to reach the side of the path, and she struck the rope. Her aim was sloppy, against strands moving every which way, but it did the trick. At once, the bags fell free. Some broke open as they hit the ground, scattering utensils and pots across the road. The enormous canvas roll bounced, turned, then collided with an unseen force. One end bucked high into the air, while the other skidded forward, pushed by the momentum of the invisible beast. The other tumbling bags produced similar effects as the charging horde swerved and stumbled. Amid the chaos, the creatures fell back, but didn't stop completely. It was enough distance, however, to weaken the silence. Enough for a small but noticeable improvement in her hearing. Taking advantage of this, Captain Velt began to shout as though his voice were passing through a long tunnel.
The village entrance is narrow, walled off by these cliffs. So tight, 2 carriages can't pass side by side. We'll take advantage of that and block that space.
What?
Shouted Cassia.
With what time?
It'll be enough,
said Velt with a devious smile.
There's an old watchtower above the entrance. With a single, well-placed munition, I'll collapse the structure right into the gap.
And then?
Asked Cassia, shaking her head.
Even if that works, you're talking about a rock pile. They'll force their way through.
I never said it would stop them,
said Velt, his voice growing fainter by the second.
Keep ahead of the blast, and we'll...
She didn't hear the rest. It was enough, however, to convey his intent. They wouldn't stop at the village, but keep riding through the night. Just like that, Marion's careful planning had amounted to nothing. After coming all this way to visit this monastery, they'd have no more than a handful of seconds before rushing off again, deeper into the mountains. At this point, however, Cassia didn't care. For the first time since the attack began, Velt had presented a feasible solution. And though she didn't relish the idea of pushing on through the night, bringing their horses and themselves to exhaustion, it was their only option. The only way both she and her sister might safely reach home. Even Marion would have to agree. The lady might be foolhardy, but she wasn't suicidal. As Cassia alternated her view between the road and craning her head back, she found Tenlin soaring above the ravine. His arc curved until he landed atop the cliff. When he stopped near a large boulder protruding from the edge, over half as large as the carriage itself, the strangest thing occurred. The rock began to tremble, breaking loose from its position. Then both Tenlin and the rock fell toward the enemy. While Cassia knew this was possible, that Tenlin could extend his influence to the area surrounding him, she also knew it came at a significant cost, draining his reserves at an exponential rate. Tenlin curved his path upward, just before the boulder slammed into the ground. Unexpectedly, sound returned, the thunderous boom too loud for her sensitized ears. Her mare staggered as the earth trembled. Loose dirt rained down on both sides. There was more she could hear, shouts from the soldiers, the thundering echoes of hooves, an unearthly wail. It all mixed like a deafening flood.
Are they dead?
A man yelled, unwilling to look back and check for himself. When Cassia turned, she could only see an immense cloud of dust filling the gorge. But then she saw shapes, outlines of figures where the dust was absent. There were spindly voids where limbs twisted and rose to their feet.
Bloody heavens,
she said, without revealing what she'd seen. The dust didn't cling to the creatures as one might expect. Anything that didn't penetrate their hides, including paints, powders, or tinctures, would slough off. This left Cassia barely a few seconds to count at least 3 shapes. But due to the fact she was riding a horse, and the billowing dust refused to stay still, there could have easily been twice that number.
Keep moving,
she shouted, disheartened to hear her voice diminishing. The creatures were recovering too quickly.
Are we almost there?
She asked, while the captain could still hear.
I don't understand,
he responded.
We should have seen it by now.
His change in tone was unnerving, casting aside his mask of confidence. Cassia, however, refused to give up. Even if the forest was moving, it couldn't have changed much, could it? The mountains were still here, right where they should be. This pass, this gorge was still here. So the tower must be too. Perhaps not in the same place, but close, right? Try as she might, she saw nothing up the mountain or hidden in the trees. Nothing that resembled an artificial construct. Up ahead, the ravine curved, and she couldn't see what was causing the riders to slow.
Bloody heavens,
she thought, knowing the last thing they needed was one more obstacle. It wasn't until she'd rounded the corner that she realized the truth was much worse. The problem was the tower, fallen to ruin. With no other choice, she pulled her horse to a stop.
Damn it,
she yelled. Had the unattended structure collapsed by itself? Or had another group, perhaps, fled through here before and concocted a plan similar to Velt's? Either way, there was more rubble than a single building could account for. The lumber was intermingled with great sections of earth and rock, broken from the cliff and adding to the barrier. Due to the narrow space, wooden supports jutted 12 feet into the air, sharp and jagged. Moreover, the wreckage had spilled in both directions, creating a distance of over 100 feet between their group and the opposite side.
What now?
She shouted. Velt didn't seem to hear. he turned back the way they came, eyes wide and jaw rigid. This time, the air thickened all at once, like an avalanche of silence, crushing them in. She brought her horse around and looked down a canyon that only appeared empty. At the moment, even Tenlin seemed to have gone missing. Clutching her spear, she struggled to keep her hands from shaking. Beads of sweat ran down her neck and back.
Oh, gods,
she breathed. But by then, she could not even hear herself. The Nightmare Throne by Austen Lynn Clarke releases September 27th everywhere books are sold. You can pre-order it right now on Amazon in standard hardcover, paperback, ebook, as well as the audiobook you've already started listening to. The printed version features 50 illustrations produced by the author himself, including chapter headers, full-page artwork, and a double-page map in black and white. Furthermore, from right now until September 27th, a special deluxe full-color edition is available for purchase on Kickstarter. This includes the same 50 illustrations printed in color, as well as a dust jacket, custom end papers, sprayed edges, and alternate artwork printed along the case laminate, featuring both sisters on opposite sides. This version will be signed and numbered by the author in the order of Kickstarter backer number. That way, people who pledge earlier will receive a lower and more collectible number. Just search for The Nightmare Throne by Austen Lynn Clarke, or check the show notes of this podcast for the relevant links.